Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Agent is In. This is episode 49, and today we're going to take a look at our latest non-LTS release, 326.0. This release, I guess the code name for it is admin. Let me share. All right, we can see my screen. All right, let me pull up the blog post for our release and let's take a look at that. All right, so here's our blog post. So code name was admin, and that takes it from this new feature in Enterprise, where you can no longer expect on new installs to have a default user or password. You'll have to set up your admin user when you install the software using a setup code. So it works like this, and I actually was spinning up an environment so that we could take a look at this, and it's asking for my setup code. I used the Vagrant environment, and here we can see in the instructions that it told us what to do. So use this setup code 4780607. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. We'll find out if it's expired or not. I don't remember when I started this. Oh, it took it. So let me get logged in. So set up my user. And an error occurred. Oh, that's great. What a great demo. Let's see here. Setup complete. What if I refresh? There.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see there.
All
right.
Use this as well.
So yeah, we got to do that on first time setup. So otherwise, things inside mostly look pretty much the same as they have in previous 325 release, which introduced audit log here, and the last LTS that introduced groups and things like that. So let's take a look at the list here. Some other new stuff. Let's see here. Important note about the admin user. So if you're upgrading, you shouldn't upgrade to 326. It's a non-LTS release. So there won't be any patch releases coming for it, but you should install it and take it for a spin. But we're going to do some additional work to deal with the existing default users and things like that on upgrades. So we can look forward to that. And I'm sure we'll publish information about that. Let's skip over that for just a moment here. I wanted to highlight these release pages here. So if you've been using CFEngine for a long time, and if you've been keeping up to date with things that are a little bit more recent, you'll know that we've got a couple of tools that help with various things. We've got CFBS to help manage your policy set. Now, these tools we do vendor them with enterprise software, but you can install them separately. And we release new versions of these at a much more rapid pace. So it doesn't align with our other 6-month release schedule. So you can always check out, see what's new in CFBS on the releases page on GitHub. And then the same thing goes for CF Remote, which allows you to easily download packages from specific or the latest versions, install them, spin up some machines, things like that. One of the new...
We had a quick question from Michael.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Before we move on.
This is enterprise, not community, right?
Yes, that... well, no. I guess it depends. Are you talking about the first time setup code, or are you talking about CFBS and CF Remote?
Well, how about both?
Okay, so yes, enterprise, when we're talking about anything to do with the web UI. So CFEngine Core, all open source. CFEngine Enterprise has a few enterprise components, and the web UI and reporting stuff is part of that. These tools, however, CFBS and CF Remote, are both open source, like Core, and are useful in Core. So you can use CFBS to manage your policy set, even if you're not using Enterprise. Leverage things from the build index or your own private modules to kind of stitch your policy set together and help you with those reproducible builds. And CF Remote, also useful for Core for downloading. I think it's the easiest way to download packages. You just CF Remote, download, and then you can slurp packages from the right place to wherever you are. You can use it to spin up a VM on supported platforms, install CFEngine, Bootstrap, things like that. So all of these tools, CF Remote and CFBS, both super useful for Core as well. So not just Enterprise. Any other questions?
Nope.
No?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the most recent changes to CF Remote is this kind of shortcut to be able to drop to a shell on a host that you have saved. So you can see here, CF Remote connect, and then it just drops you to a shell. So it's just wrapping SSH, but it can be useful if you're working with usually like test hosts or something like that. You can save a few hosts and then reference them by short name or just connect to a shell.
Yeah, so the save command is something you can do to just generically save some SSH particulars to a name. And then with this, you can use that name like hub. So when you do the save, it might be, an IP address, a port, all kinds of different stuff. But then here it's just hub, which is kind of a time thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
We talked about it previously, the CFBS analyze command. Of course, that's part of the latest release of CFBS as well. And then another thing that I wanted to highlight were kind of a collection of new functions that were in 326. So there's find local users, get bundle meta tags, host with group, is type, is connectable, and user in group. So find local users, it does what it says. It looks for local users on the system that match the filter, and then returns a data structure of those users. So here is an example policy where we can see that it's going to be looking for root users. So GID 0 name root. So we find local users with that filter. And then we pulled the index off of that container, which is where we got the names of bin filtered and find local users. Yep. Bin list, root list. So, yeah, that's handy because you can avoid parsing etc password directly. So this is only supported, I think, on Linux returns. I don't know if the documentation says that. I think, yeah, Unix systems, right? So instead of, there's already things in the master files policy framework and various policies like in build index that will parse these things for you, and you can get at these data structures, but this does it in C and it's faster. We can, in fact, I have those functions right here. I was just playing with them. So if we get out of here, we can see it does work. Root bin, and then if we change this to like, let's change root filter to name Nick Anderson. And there we go. Cool. All right, so looking at the next one, get bundle meta tags. So this is kind of a companion to get variable meta tags, get class meta tags, kind of relates to bundles matching as well. So you can find bundles that have a tag that match a specific tag. So this, given a bundle name, you can find out what tags the bundle has. So some more in the area of kind of introspection of the policy from within the policy. Hosts with group. So this is an enterprise only function. So these two are available in core. This one is an enterprise only function, and it's going to give you a list of hosts by name, address, or the host key digest that are in one of the host groups. So here in this example, we can see hosts with group Linux return the name of the hosts. So if we poke back over here at Mission Portal and go ahead and go over to groups, look at the shared groups. So we've got these default groups here, and here's the Linux group. So if we run that function on the hub, we would expect to see hub. So we can try this. Let's see, where was that? It was host with group. So let's get this. And then we can report the host list. hub.example.com.
Boom.
Yeah. So that can be useful if, you've got, right? If you remember, groups in Mission Portal are based off of data that's reported about that host. And then you can assign data to a shared group that will be distributed to those hosts. So now from policy on the hub, you can also then generate more dynamic lists of these hosts and groups, distribute that to other hosts, and then they can kind of know who their peers are. There's the peering functions that you can use to slice that up to know if you want to orchestrate something kind of across the group. Let's see here, moving on, hosts with class. I should also mention, so it's like hosts with class. Let's look at that one. It's old. So this is a similar function, also enterprise only. So similarly, it will give you a list back of, name, address, or host key if a host is reporting a specific class. So host with group is kind of a layer on top of that. We've got another new function is type, which is kind of low level if you're needing to do some type of checking within the policy to make sure that something is what you expect something is. This can be really useful if you need to validate some data that's coming in from an external source. If there's some possibility that something funny could leak in there, and you need to inspect it to make sure it's what you expect. This is kind of a companion to the type function, which is actually mentioned there. So you can just see here that is data. So if is type foo data. So we have foo right here, the variable. If it's a data, then is data will be defined. Same thing goes for Boolean. So here we have data foo bar that's true. So you can inspect kind of deeply into a data container with that as well. Is connectable. So this is another nice convenience function to kind of help you address cases where you're dealing with remote resources within your policy. So generally speaking, we recommend that you write your policy that doesn't depend on remote resources. But in practice, sometimes you do need to depend on remote resources. And if a remote resource is down, you probably have bigger problems. But is connectable can help you avoid some of those problems becoming worse, waiting on something like a timeout. So you can this is kind of a companion to, there's another function here. It's not listed. What was the name of that other function? And host IP, no. Is type IP range. What's the other function that you can connect to a port and send commands.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of what it is right now.
Oh, it's going to kill me. Read TCP. That's it.
Oh, okay.
I think, yeah. So it's kind of like read TCP, where you can connect to a port and then communicate with it kind of at a lower level. So historically, this sort of thing has been used to do some type of remote probe. But importantly, one thing that you'll notice that's missing from the arguments here is a timeout.
Yeah.
So that can really slow your policy run down if you've got several of those things and then the remote end isn't responding. So that's another area where this is connectable function can be useful. Just see, can you establish a connection and be able to time that out pretty quickly. And finally, user in group. So simply returns if a user is a member of a group name. So we got root in root. So is user root in root? Yes, it is. So another thing to kind of help you inspect the state of your system, which can then inform you on kind of what choices you're going to need to make. And let's return to the blog post to see if there's any other highlights. I mean, that's pretty much it, I think, for 326. I'm curious, though. With this kind of handful of new functions here, I think there's at least one other new function that's already been merged to master. So that'll land in 327, the next LTS release. So I'm curious if anybody else has ideas for functions that they would like to see introduced.
Hey, Jay.
Oh,
I
there's
see you
a
got your hand raised.
hand
Yeah,
up.
of course. And he's up this one because we emailed about it recently. So,
I think I know what you're talking about, but I couldn't hear it actually.
yeah, so an idea that I had for a function follows on to an idea that I had for a function years ago that you folks kindly implemented, which was class filter CSV, which reads a CSV file into a data container, which does something that that read CSV doesn't do. So read CSV doesn't have an option to say, oh, the first the first line is a set of headers. And so like read CSV creates like an array of arrays or a list of lists. How I think you would say that. But class filter CSV can create an array of dicts where that first line being the first line being a header, labeling the fields would give you a bunch of named fields in a dictionary. So that's a great thing. So one idea for a function would be maybe to update read CSV to optionally say the first line is a header and read a dictionary. But because class filter CSV I've found so useful, it would also be really cool to be able to filter a data container by class. But so to have some item in a data container, whether that data container was like an array of arrays or some parsable JSON or some like nested dictionaries or something like that, where you could say, hey, this field name is actually contains some class logic, right? Like could be like, oh, Linux and in data center X, so that it would filter out the data from the data container that where the class statement wasn't true for the host that was running the policy. Was that a clear description?
I think so.
I mean, it was for me.
It's because we've already talked about it.
I know we've already talked about it. Oh, such a leading question.
So one of the things that we do in my place is we have what we think about as data driven configuration, where we have instead of a whole bunch of logic around, like we used to have a bunch of logic around like, oh, configure DNS, configure SSSD, configure Kerberos, right? Like now we're like, oh, we have you know, files and, files that need to be like rendered from a template, or files that need to be copied from a directory, or symbolic links that need to be made, or packages that need to be added or removed. And we do all this stuff based on, some data structure, which in our case right now is these CSV-like files that say, well, if you're this, if this set of if this class logic evaluates true for the host, then this is the like the source, the destination, and um, if the promise was repaired, then optionally run this command. So it could be like, if we're talking about changing, adding a drop in for a system D unit, for example, to change the timing. Um, if if I'm a trading host, I want to reschedule so that I only run config management. I can only run CFEngine like after trading hours. And then, so I render some template or copy this override into place. And then I optionally, run this command to do a system CTL, system D reload, so that the service gets updated. So we've kind of simplified things for us anyway, that matches how we think about things. But the ability to filter data items based on like classes evaluating to true is just like a key part of that for us.
Yeah. I agree that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, like, for who else, because I've seen in some like in some of some of the forum, plus there's people asking about class filter CSV, for example. And I'm just curious, like if there's anybody on the call today who, for whom that would be a useful thing. Because like, I look at some functions and I say, well, what would be the use case of that? And then when I think about it, I think of like, oh, that would be a great use case for somebody who is doing something in this way.
Mm-hmm. Anybody on the call have any thoughts about that type of functionality? I mean, it might not be clear from here. I guess I should, if you haven't used class filter CSV already. So this obviously is commands that are setting up for this example down here. And one thing that I want to note, which is probably like the biggest gotcha, I feel like with this function, is that it needs to be RFC 4180 compliant. And what that means in practice is that you're going to need CRLF line endings, like Windows style line endings, or else it's not going to parse right. And I think that this is the most common issue that I see when people are using it, is that they don't have the proper line endings, and then things don't parse right. So
I want to interrupt and say that I trip over that one from time to time. And so what I have done was, in our policy, I have a pre-commit hook that, runs a little scrap of Python that I wrote that takes our CSV-like files, because like we're editing them in Linux. So it's very likely that, and I can't really enforce that somebody is like putting control M's at the end of their file.
Right.
So yeah, we just have a pre-commit hook that, we edit them in one place, and the RFC 4180 compliant files show up in another place, but just as part of your commit, that gets done for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely need a process to make sure that's right, because that's the common culprit. But I guess what is maybe not so illustrative down here in this example, all of these examples are using singular classes, and the field that you identify as the class expression can be an expression. Like, it doesn't have to be a singular like this example shows. You can do a full expression of multiple classes together, like this and that, but not this other thing.
Yeah, it's hugely powerful for us, right? So we can say, if it's like in this, if it's in if it is a host, I work for a financial firm, so I can say something like, oh, if this is a host that serves, um, the Asia Pacific, the Asia Pacific region, then the running of config management, like we have a flag that we call change window, where like we can run CFEngine, we run CFEngine every 5 minutes on most of our hosts, but we have this thing called change window where like we will only make really big changes like package installations and service changes during this change window for hosts,
Mhm.
which is generally after business hours, because we don't want to accidentally screw anything up during the trading day. So we can say things like, oh, the host is in Asia Pacific and it's a trading host. Right. So that's great to be able to do that with full class logic in those statements.
That's awesome. I mean, I already sort of know, but since you're talking, I know that you were using this strategy before you were using class filter CSV.
Yes, and it's why we asked you to implement class filter CSV.
So I'm curious what kind of speed up you saw.
Well, so one thing that I can tell everybody, I'm sure many of the people on this, in this webinar, have had the experience of realizing that they've just used the CFEngine domain-specific language as a general purpose programming language. So for my part, to like parse CSV files and to turn them into dictionaries that are filtered by these class statements. It was a horribly complex set of like data filtering things to do. If I think about it now, I might, now that I'm better at using like map data with the JSON pipe, which is, for anybody here who's processing data, like that is a super amazing thing that CFEngine does. So I was just processing this stuff in, all kinds of policy, and just changing from doing the stuff in policy as a general purpose programming language to using class filter CSV, which is, using, primitives that probably already existed in CFEngine. Like I get like end to end on my entire policy, I get a 27% speed up, which is freaking great.
yeah,
I mean,
that's
just,
crazy.
and for us switching from this kind of functionally based config management to this like atoms of the operating system based
Mhm.
configuration management already saved us 90%. So like we're even better than that now. That's crazy. Like nobody notices CFEngine running anymore, which is great.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's invisible to people, except
Yeah.
that like their hosts just do what they want and they do it like invisibly and quickly.
Yeah. I mean, that was always the idea, right? I mean, Mark's like, let it disappear into the walls. I mean, that's how he always described CFEngine and stuff. Awesome. Well, I mean, does anybody else have any function ideas? I mean, I'd love to spend some more time on the class.
I'm sorry, but I had a function idea just from what you were going through.
Yeah.
And this was about read TCP and is connectable. So like we have a we have a pattern here where we do not use any network services to while config management, while we're running CFEngine, right? CFEngine does not rely on any network services, because if, for example, you were like, oh, let's just see if host is in this net group, and then like your name services like had a hiccup or something like that, you might reconfigure your host in a weird way. But anyway, it occurred to me that read TCP totally needs an optional timeout, like 100% needs it, because is connectable, like the fact that you can connect to a host is it's fine. Like I can do an NC-Z on a host and say like, oh, great, it's there, it's responding on the network, and then connect to a service that is that has failed or that is in some kind of
Right.
like crazy state. So anyway, my function idea here is
Extend it.
not that I will ever use it, but absolutely put an optional timeout and read TCP.
Yeah, it looks like the max bytes isn't optional already, so there is room to add a timeout on there. Cool. To do, remember to file a ticket. Okay. Captured. Any other function ideas while we're kind of on the topic? No? Okay.
Hey, I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
One of the function ideas I have for the string compare, or sorry, not string compare, version compare, is to not ignore things after the patch, if possible, because I know like I've had a ticket put in about this, and it's a bit cumbersome to break the version numbers down into like 4 or 5 different parts if they have, for example, the example I gave in the ticket that I had submitted was Centrify version, 6.1.1-330. And when we're trying to do like kind of semi-automated upgrades of that with some user input, which I did get built out, by the way, I got the service file built out. I got it calling on a script, which calls on a promise, which prompts the user and allows them to kind of give some input on whether they want to complete the update at that time.
That's awesome.
But it would be really nice to be able to give some logic to the service launching to say like, hey, if this version is, greater than or equal to 6.1.1-330, don't launch the service. Without having to break down that version number into like I said, 4 or 5 different pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that would be nice. I don't know. I think that the reason that this was limited to that is because that is what could be understood to be regular.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
But if it would be nice to be able to somehow.
Yeah, I think the semantic versioning does support kind of alphanumeric sorting the bits after the major minor patch.
Yeah.
It may just be a coincidence of kind of it was like it says, like we had a version compare already built in that didn't include that. So maybe we could include that.
It's definitely more of a nice to have, really. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's run into this kind of issue and had to do a cumbersome version of splitting. Yeah, exactly. Because like in my head it seems really simple. We have Centrify version 6.1.1-330. I want to compare whether the client's version is greater than or equal to that version to not initiate an update.
Which means 2 comparisons, because you've got to extract the bit that's not supported to be able to compare that, and you have to compare the bit that's supported, I guess, to find out if you even need to bother comparing the other bit.
Yeah. It's probably a lot more complex under the hood than I'm making it seem, for sure. But it would be a nice to have as if we're looking for suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Other thoughts,
Yeah,
ideas?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to pipe up and say that Debian has a like D package has a thing called version compare. So there's like a deb version thing, and so D package has a -- version compare option, and it has it might be a good place to look for a more complete implementation of how to do version compare in a way that like may go beyond the GNU version and sort stuff.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I did actually see that as a function of DPKG on Debian-based systems. And in our environment, we run both like Red Hat and Debian-based systems. So we do have to sometimes do a little bit of generalization or class guard specifics for the 2 different environments. So it'd be nice to be able to, I mean, you know, if it was on all Debian systems, I'd probably be able to call upon that in a promise somehow. But because we run it with two different environments, you know, like Red Hat style systems and Debian style systems, it's harder to do that for both. So yeah, if there's some way to extract that from, you know, the DPKG and use that as an example for, you know, an improved version of the function.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of open source.
So to that, I'm looking here because I have recollection. So there is, yeah, so there's the DKPG dash version, which will help you out on Debian systems. On RHEL systems, on enterprise Linux systems, there's a different version comparison algorithm, and we vendor the tool that allows you to compare them. It's just an external tool, and I don't see it here, but this is a Debian system. So I'm wondering if we only install that tool like on the RHEL system, but I think here, let me
it's RPM vercomp.
Thank you. That is exactly what it is.
RPM and
it's in the policy. So you can find use of this, right, in some of the legacy package method implementation of packages promises.
Yeah.
So it's a really dumb tool, right? Because it only takes like two options. So you have to kind of whatever, but you could call it directly. So as a not kind super elegant hack, because well, it's not native. I like version compare because it's native, but it's not enough. But I think version compare would cover the other end of that, but you would be forced down like a commands route or something to do the comparison. And
yeah.
So.
And I don't know, I'd have to look at the promise that I did write this on. I think part of the issue I ran into is also the normal ordering too. So without some of it without custom normal ordering.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And Nick and Craig, do you know if the function, if the version compare function in CFEngine is based on the GNU core utils version sort? Or if it's just something that you all implemented internally?
That's an interesting question.
Because GNU core utils version sort actually is largely, it looks like it's, I'm just looking at it now, it's like largely based on the Debian package comparison with some well-documented differences.
I'm looking right now.
Okay, I mean, it's probably not a real-time answer, but
well,
you may know the code well enough to make it be a real-time answer.
I'm almost there. Yeah.
Okay.
One more call to my command called def, which is short for definition. Yeah, it looks like it uses compare version, which is our own code, and it just it uses scanf and checks things with dots. So yeah. That's why it doesn't support those other things, is because it literally looks for three things with dots in between the three and compares the things.
Yeah. I think that was code that we already had in there that we elevated up into the function.
Yeah, it's stuff we already had, and we were using it for, like you said, like this says, the what do they call the macros, right?
Yeah, the macros.
Yeah, we use it for this like if greater version or whatever. So you can guard chunks of policy depending on the version of the binary that you're using.
All these examples only show major, minor.
Yeah, and that's the issue I kept running into.
Yeah.
I must have spent like almost an entire day just kind of doing some looking around.
Poking, yeah. Yeah.
So maybe a new function like, version compare GNU or version compare core utils or something like that.
Yeah.
Just something that doesn't break what people already
or
have.
Re-implement the function guts and it can still behave the same way.
Just but then functionality. It may or may not behave the same way. That's not, that might be the.
Well, that
might be the issue. Okay, cool.
Yeah, the
Great to ask these questions. I love it.
Yeah.
The D package one is a bespoke parser and all kinds of stuff. I'm looking at D package source code, and it's just bespoke stuff.
Yeah, I think the GNU core utils, like there's the core utils have a whole lot of documentation about how all this stuff works. It's probably more documentation than code.
Right.
Cool. Other thoughts on functions, extensions, new ones? No? All right. Well, I think that would pretty much conclude. Yeah.
I was going to mention an idea I had the other day, which is half-baked and kind of funny.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly something I would want, but it was kind of an interesting observations. So that we have methods, promises, right, which can call any number of bundles, right? And I was thinking it might be kind of neat to kind of have like a bash set dash E option where you might call it a different promise type, like sequence or something like that, where if the first one fails, the other ones don't get called.
Fail fast. So you can implement that with.
I know, I know,
but not everybody does.
Yeah.
So you can implement that.
Like a depends or a classes card. So what was happening was that I was writing policy and I was finding, after I write 2 to 3 levels of do something, make a class, guard it against something else, like I get bored. I get tired of writing that. So I wanted a thing where I could just say like, without having to write so much. And I know there's depends on as well. It's just it's almost like I wanted a section of policy where you could switch into what do we call this style of programming? Not
written order.
Yeah, no, it's like declarative versus
imperative.
Imperative, right? Yeah, so it's like I almost wanted like a little section of policy that was like imperative. Yeah, so it's just a funny idea.
All right, so for everybody else that doesn't know, you can implement that behavior that you're looking for using abort bundle classes or abort classes. So these are regular expressions that you define that match a class, that when that class is defined, either the bundle that's executing is aborted and it moves on to the next bundle, or it aborts all of the execution of the agent. So if you want to have this, the cowboy file, right? / cowboy, that means like CFEngine don't do anything. There's an admin on this system who's wrangling it manually. You can just abort that.
Right. And there's 2 other ways too, right? So there's like the depends on and handle. That's one way. So maybe we could show that real quick if you find it.
Yeah. So that doesn't actually abort or short circuit. It just skips the promises that didn't satisfy.
Exactly. Right. So there's depends on and handle, which I think is quite useful. So what you can do is you can say reports 2 depends on handle 1 and reports 1 defines handle 1. So in other words, you do 1 and then 2. So that's like an ordering mechanism. The other thing you could do is you could say like a classes attribute on something, right? So you say like, oh, like I want to I don't want to define a class in a classes promise, but I want to like run a command, and if it succeeds, define a class, and then later guard the next thing. So I had like a sequence of things, right, to do, and so then I would define a class, and if that was okay, then I would do the next thing. And if that was okay, I'd do the next thing. If that was okay, I'd do the next thing. And I mean, it's just it's
I know. That gets you down into a well that's not fun to be in.
Exactly. And so you have to back up and think, okay, well, what am I actually promising? right? You kind of have to like go up to the higher level theory of like how CFEngine works. You say like, I want to promise that this thing exists, and then check if that thing exists and do, it's an interesting exercise. So just a reminder that CFEngine works differently, and it's nice to know how it works as you write your policy.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think that does bring us to the end of our, short look at 326. So be great if you guys can take it for a spin. Note that this one does have the librsync enabled by default. So for, your remote copies, so you should have some bandwidth savings on changes where you're transmitting a delta. And yeah, we'd love to hear how it's working out for you. If you get to take it for a spin, let us know. And otherwise, I guess we'll see you next time for episode 50. Thanks.